People who have worked at resorts, what's the most messed up thing you've seen? A guy had split up with his girlfriend, right, weeks before. He checked into our hotel the day before Valentine's Day and sent her a message that he was in room XXX. He said that if she didn't show up, he'd know it was over. She didn't show. He took action the next morning. He had brought a tool for undoing the safety catch on the window and used it before he jumped. By some miracle, he missed the pedestrians. The restaurant was packed with customers having a romantic Valentine's Day breakfast, some just on the other side of the glass. Many people required trauma counseling afterward. Story 2. I worked at the canyons in Park City as a liftie for winter. I worked the base lifts, including the gondola, and one day I was at the top. At the lift across from the top of the gondola, Saddleback, I was randomly watching as it calmed down midday and saw a woman and her kid hop on. I thought nothing of it, obviously. A few minutes later, the lift stopped and didn't start spinning for 15 to 20 minutes. During this time, a ton of patrollers on sleds came ripping up under the lift. I came to find out that the woman had a seizure on the way up, didn't have the safety bar down, and fell off. Patrollers got there as soon as they could, but there was nothing they could do. I will never forget helping the crying kid onto the gondola to go down with the patrollers. I'm not epileptic or anything, but I always put my safety bar down because of this now. You never know. I still think about it frequently during the winter, and it's been over 10 years. Some people ride with the bar up. Is this really a thing? Story 3. It was 2006 at the La Jolla Beach and Tennis Club, and I was part of the beach crew. I came upon a kid who had fallen while skimboarding. His mom, a trophy wife, was nearby as I called a paramedic on our radio. As we waited for the medic, I saw the shadow of a man walking up to us. I looked up and saw that he was wearing cowboy boots and jeans, which was very strange for someone at the waterline on the beach. Then I saw he had a pint glass full of whiskey, a half-buttoned shirt with a dragon on it, and crazy white hair blowing in the wind. That's when I recognized him. Yes, it was David Carradine, his wife, and her kids. He kind of shrugged and walked on. I didn't see him again until later that night when a couple of colleagues and I had to physically carry him up the stairs to his room at the hotel next door because he was so intoxicated. Not long after that, I learned he passed away, but I will never forget that encounter. Story 4. I worked at a ski resort where employees weren't allowed to enter through the main doors even if it was the most direct route. We had to navigate unmarked tunnels under the main hotel, pretty much memorizing how many turns to take. It always unintentionally scared guests as we would suddenly exit from what looked like broom closets into the main parts of the hotel. It felt pretty messed up to not be treated as humans, you know? I mean, the hotel has employees. Why the push to be invisible in this mole-like fashion? I was a babysitter, so I'd usually get called in to work evenings until midnight so the parents could enjoy a child-free night at the resort. The place had an unspoken policy to keep kids away from most of the resort. If the parents took them places, nothing was said, but as babysitters, we had instructions to keep the kids in only specific spots. My charges were usually so young that the parents just wanted someone to watch them in the hotel room the whole time and make sure they went to bed by 8 or so. Sometimes the parents had ordered room service and encouraged me to get something too. As a poor local resident who never used the resort, this was a treat. During the day, the resort really tried to sell parents on leaving their kids at camp just to keep them away. Camp basically consisted of being kept in a separate building away from anything remotely fun. The staff would just play back-to-back movies or board games with the kids. I think one 20-minute break from camp was authorized, during which we were allowed to take the kids outside on a lawn of the resort. The kids would see the paddle boats and always want to use them. We would have to say no and then tell them to ask their parents to take them. I always felt bad for the camp kids. They were super bored. We tried to entertain them, but when camp lasts from 7 a.m. to 3:30 p.m., the kids basically felt like they were at school with no educational component during summer break. Few of them wanted that. Story 5. I worked at a ski resort for a year. My housemate tried to take advantage of an intoxicated girl. For anyone wondering, yes, I stopped it from happening. It was at a small party at the apartment. He isolated her twice during the night outside. The second time, he'd convinced her to let him go to her place with her, then came back inside and pretended he needed to sleep because of an early work meeting the next day. I knew what he was up to when I saw him go outside with her the first time. I'm very good at reading people and situations, but he'd also pressured my friend into drinking when alone with him before, even though she said she didn't want any alcohol. I stayed outside to wait for our mutual friend to leave. I wanted a witness to him not actually going to sleep. My mutual friend and I talked, and I stalled until he came out of the apartment. He was obviously shocked we were out there, but I played it off. Just as the mutual friend invited me to hang out at his place, the intoxicated girl drove up the road from driving her friends back down the mountain. I got into her car, and my housemate was already calling her after texting her a minute before. He was also magically right by the apartment, even though he told my mutual friend and me he was going on a midnight walk. I asked the intoxicated girl if he was trying to sleep with her, and she said I probably gave him the wrong impression. And at that point, I told her she was intoxicated and couldn't have given anyone any impression. She and I made the 10-second drive to my mutual friend's house, and our housemate bolted up the mountain. He was scared speechless when he got there, but I played it off and kept a close eye on him until the mutual disdain between us drove him to kick me out. When I discovered he'd inquired about a girl who worked at the resort hotel, as well as a coworker of mine who was very petite and still had braces, I reported the things I'd seen and heard to his boss and told his girlfriend about his infidelity and let the landlord know about his numerous lease violations in an attempt to drive him away from the resort altogether. He got fired. His girlfriend stayed for a few more months before they split. She hated me immediately afterward, but seemed to be fine with me after the breakup, probably because she suffered the same narcissistic emotional cruelty I did, and the landlord chose money over ethics. Our mutual friends either chose not to take a side or actively felt like what I did was wrong, though the two I thought I'd bonded with and who swore they thought he was horrible and that I was the only one truly respected kept hanging out with him and wanted nothing to do with me. One mutual friend, a woman, even told me that although he did try to essay her friend, it was her friend's fault for putting herself in that situation. My other friend has always admired my quick thinking in that situation because most people wouldn't have picked up on it and something bad would have happened. That idea scares the hell out of me for any woman getting pursued by a creep. I left a few months later. It taught me a lot about people. I regret nothing. Story 6. I worked as a holiday representative in Gran Canaria for a couple of seasons. Over New Year's, two of us were asked to visit a guest in the capital's hospital. She had been airlifted from a neighboring island. Honestly, I can't remember why this was 25 years ago. Possibly her appendix. Whatever it was obviously bad. After a few days, the hospital staff in broken English told her, "Your fiancé is coming in." She was so excited to see him and grateful that he had been able to fly over to visit. It turns out he was coming in his own air ambulance. He had slipped on the hotel lobby's marble floor and lost consciousness. He passed away 2 days later. That's when we were asked to visit her. She was such a champ. We didn't know what to expect, but she was holding it together, a typical English woman worried about everyone else. Her only complaint was that she didn't have her glasses. I remember thinking, oh man, all this and you can't even see? I suspect she must have had a huge emotional crash somewhere down the line. I think of her often and I hope she's doing okay. Story 7. I never worked at a resort, but this is a resort-related story. I was in Orlando visiting my brother when a friend of mine from Hollywood, Florida called. He was all excited and I didn't understand what he said at first, so I had him repeat it. Then he yelled into the phone, "Dude, Nicole Smith just passed away." I thought it was incredibly weird that he was calling me to tell me that. He wasn't the type of guy who paid a lot of attention to what celebrities did, and I didn't understand why he thought it was so noteworthy that he had to call me. I just said, "Okay." He said, "No, she just passed away. We were hanging out at the bar in the casino, and she said she wasn't feeling well and went upstairs about half an hour ago. Her boyfriend just called from the room saying that she's gone." Evidently, he had been hanging out with her entourage at the Hard Rock Casino. They kept partying at the bar when she went upstairs to lie down. He hadn't known her or any of her entourage previously, but had run into them at the casino and started hanging out with them. Story 8. I worked in hospitality for quite a few years, and some of the most memorable stories are a highly intoxicated man with a group for a convention was locked out of his room. He jumped from the second story to get in. A wife called the hotel worried her husband might harm himself due to drinking. I found him at the bar and he was plastered. He was worried I'd tell his wife, so I asked if he needed a hug. He was a man in his 50s and cried into my shoulder with all of his coworkers around. He was okay, and his wife called a couple of days later to thank me for my kindness. A couple came to the resort for their anniversary weekend. The husband received a text from his mistress's wife, and all hell broke loose in the fine dining restaurant. They continued arguing. At the front desk, I was able to de-escalate the situation and book the wife a separate room. In the middle of the night, once the wife was asleep, the husband checked out of the hotel. He suspended her phone, canceled all her credit cards, took all of his things, and drove 4+ hours home. On February 15th, I went into her room to clean it after a one-night stay. I walked into what I thought was chocolate and strawberry syrup all over the bed. It was, in fact, not strawberry syrup, but a mix of chocolate syrup, something that resembled strawberry syrup. I found used toys in the bathroom and had a $100 bill with a sorry note on the desk. A company rented out a cottage at the resort and had security called a couple of times over noise complaints and being on the golf course after hours. Housekeeping went in the following day to find 4 naked men and a woman passed out upside down on the couch. They all worked together and she was the point of contact for the conference. The rock in her hand had to be at least 4 carats and none of them were her husband. There was a man who passed away in a bathroom from a heart attack. Thankfully, it was a restroom that not many people frequented on the property. There was also a B-list celebrity who stole a golf cart while highly intoxicated. I got him to bring it back, and then he tried to pay me to come to his room for the night. He was a recovering alcoholic with a 7 a.m. flight. I was able to get him to pull it together and make his flight. He called a couple of days later and apologized for his behavior. Story 9. I did a season at Waterpark Ski Resort. I was on the facilities team in charge of keeping the resort clean, event setup, and janitorial duties. One time, the main woman's restroom backed up and flooded everywhere. It was so bad that the maintenance team had to feed a tiny camera into the pipes to find the cause. After watching the camera, several of us went to the bathroom to clean it up. It was gross. There was about 4 or 5 inches of standing sewage water that had to be squeegeed and mopped. Bits of mess and toilet paper were floating around. If that wasn't bad enough, what really sticks with me is that I looked at the ground one more time and saw a lone corn kernel floating around in the abyss. Story 10. Not a true resort, but I did real estate development for a while in resort-style communities in Florida. Many of them have a program called Stay and Play, where you can listen to a sales pitch and pay a nominal fee to get a weekend in one of the model homes and a temporary membership to the country club. It's similar to the old timeshare free vacation if you listen to our sales pitch. Some people have definitely figured out how to game the system and got essentially free vacations by stringing them all together. Anyway, my role was to visit multiple communities each week, doing market research on sales figures, new floor plans, club membership rates, etc. for a marketing aggregate. I was regularly toured around the model homes and facilities. The sales associate would tell us all sorts of stories about finding the stay-and-play couples throwing massive parties and trashing the place, doing the dirty around the clubhouse facilities, or getting intoxicated and crashing their cars into existing residents' mailboxes. Story 11. This wasn't me, but a friend of a friend. Everything that happens at sea is covered under a myriad of strange laws. You can't really sue a cruise line if something happens out at sea, but that's not well known, and the press photos of cruises look really fun. My friend had a high school education from Croatia and worked on the maintenance crew for a major cruise line. He said the repairs he was told to do were scary. He was given some training by more senior handy guys, but not a lot. One time, 3 pieces of weightlifting equipment broke and his boss told him to get it sorted out that day. So he took a toolbox and just figured it out as best as he could. He couldn't fix one of the machines, but he made it look sort of fixed and hoped no one would complain. He also had a bathroom vanity come down. 2 guys held it in place while he covered it in caulk to put it back up. That's what he was told to do. Wild. Story 12. I worked at an upscale hotel, and here are some things I remember. There was a large banquet area with collapsible walls that created smaller meeting areas. A coworker whizzed in the space where the collapsible wall would fold into, and it stunk for weeks. At a company event, a guy got intoxicated and a loud thunk was heard from the back of the room as he fell out of his chair. The entire room of 600 people heard and saw it. The hotel promptly got him a wheelchair and a free room to sleep it off. My car was broken into in broad daylight. The guys who did it worked at the same hotel. They were found an hour later when they tried to return the crowbar that they had borrowed from the maintenance department. Weeks later, they called me while I was working and told me to drop the charges or they'd end me. Several people heard it all since the call was on a shared walkie-talkie. One event included smaller gatherings catered by the hotel in the guest rooms. I received a call that one of the rooms needed more drinks. When I arrived, I witnessed my male coworker dancing on top of one of the tables. The group promptly grabbed me and cheered for me to do the same. We had a church group one Sunday. We spent all night setting up hundreds of chairs in neat rows. The next day, when I walked in to check if they needed anything, I saw nothing but people rolling all over the floor and people speaking in tongues. The chairs were all stacked and moved out of the way. One event was Hawaiian luau themed, so they had a roasted pig for dinner. The thing was hideous to look at, but someone had to carve it on demand for the guests. One guest requested and was served its rear end. That's enough for now. Story 13. This isn't messed up, but it is interesting. I was a kid working at Disney and was on the register at a cafeteria. Some guy came up to me and asked if I knew where he could get substances and said he would pay whatever. I happen to know that all the Disney college program communities had a dealer who hung out at a nearby gas station every night at the same time, so I agreed to get him a gram for $200. I was nervous because I had never sold substances before, just a bit of grass to friends. I also took the bus to and from work, so I had to catch a bus late at night to meet him at his Disney hotel. He told me to go to the 3rd floor bathroom. He watched me go in from afar and I took a whiz. He walked in and started taking a whiz in the urinal next to me, and we made the exchange. He seemed really content, and I thought that was the end of it and that I had made a quick buck. He actually contacted me for more the same night while I was sleeping, and again until I refused because I was sick of the risk. He had a meltdown over text. Luckily, his vacation must have ended sooner rather than later because I stopped seeing him around very quickly. Story 14. I was at a beach resort about, let's say, 10 years ago, chilling on the beach. Suddenly, a lady close to us started screaming and looking towards the ocean. Another guy and I ran to her and she screamed that her son was caught in an undertow and kept going under. I looked out in the water and saw a 9 or 10-year-old boy struggling hard to stay above water. The other guy and I ran into the water and were able to grab the kid. I carried him back onto the beach in my arms. He was scared and exhausted, but otherwise okay. When I got back to the beach, I looked around for the mother who had been screaming hysterically just moments before. I couldn't find her. I sat the boy down, and a nurse who happened to be there started checking him out. I kept looking for the mother, and when I turned back towards the ocean, I saw her in about 3 feet of water. She had obviously followed us out into the water when we went after her son, but she couldn't swim and had drowned. I immediately grabbed the woman and pulled her onto the beach while 2 bystanders started CPR, but it was too late. When I looked back toward the boy, he had stood up and was looking directly at his mother lying at my feet. I was later told by a relative of the boy and mother who was inside their condo when all of this happened that she couldn't swim. Story 15. I worked at one of the resorts in Vegas. One night around 2 a.m., 2 guys wearing purge-style masks surrounded my maintenance guy, doing circles around him on BMX bikes. They had katanas on their backs, and he told them, "I have kids and I'm not going to go easy on you." They looked at each other and rode off. Another night, a kid and a mom wanted some action and left their kids unattended in our pool. One of the kids' floats went upside down and the kid was stuck inside. Someone on their second floor balcony saw it, jumped a good 3 yards out over our gate, hit the ground, and rolled into the pool to save the child. No CPR was needed, but medics came and transported the kid to the hospital. 90% of the time, the couple got charged with neglect, and I can't confirm for sure, but that's what security told me they heard from the officers. The hero got a few weeks stay because he had some minor injuries from his jump. Alright, if you're enjoying the video, don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos just like this. Story 16. This is what I heard from the people at the front desk, and then I walked in to see the rest. Apparently, this couple was supposed to meet at our hotel in Cancun. I assumed they were in a long-distance relationship because they were both arriving at different times. The guy checked in early and asked the staff to let him know if his girlfriend arrived because he was decorating the room with flowers and other romantic things. They said sure, and he got to decorating. About 5 hours later, around 10 p.m., the girl still hadn't shown up. He was concerned and kept calling her. He ran to the front desk and asked the employees if they had seen her, and they said no. He hung around the front desk for another 2 hours and still hadn't heard from her. He then ranted a bit to the staff, saying they had fought on the phone before her flight and he didn't think it was serious, but he was starting to think it was. He began drinking heavily and it was now around midnight. He started slurring his words and ranting more to the staff like they were his therapists. The staff genuinely felt bad and offered him something to eat. He refused and even started to tear up, his eyes glued to his phone. This is where I came in at the beginning of my security shift. I had to watch him for security reasons, but noticed on his phone that he was going through photos of multiple women. He then abruptly left and went outside the front door for about 10 minutes and brought back a girl, except it wasn't his girlfriend. It got even more awkward because, out of happiness and relief, one of the staff members said, "There she is, I'm so happy she's safe." The guy gave him a stop it signal and went straight to his room. I mentioned to the staff what I saw on his phone and we concluded he had definitely hired someone. We put all of our heads down and just continued to work. But the real kicker? His actual girlfriend finally showed up at 11 a.m. and said her flight was canceled. Darn Spirit Airlines. And she forgot her phone charger at home. We had to call the cheating guy's room because he didn't seem to be picking up her calls. He looked really shocked when he came down, which confused the girl. I overheard him say, "I will explain everything," as he was walking to his room. The woman had already left, according to the staff. It was a really unfortunate situation caused by a miscommunication. Story 17. This happened at Heron Island, Australia, about a decade ago. While the staff was at work, management decided to raid about 85% of the rooms for contraband furniture. The general manager, assistant manager, HR person, and head of department for housekeeping personally went room to room, taking out all furniture beyond the provided single bed and chest of drawers. Chairs, cupboards, and dressers were all gone, broken up, and thrown into dumpsters. All the personal possessions in that furniture were unceremoniously dumped in the middle of the room or on their balconies. Now keep in mind, all this furniture was private property. It had been passed down from the staff member to staff member for decades, but the general manager declared that anything staff left on the island when leaving was now property of the resort and that staff could not give possessions to other staff. They then fired a 19-year-old staff member who had been on the island for a week, having moved from France to work there for crying so loud that guests could hear it. 20% of the staff quit over the next month. A bunch of them all temporarily moved into one house in the nearby port town of Gladstone, trying to get retribution. They were sadly shut down on all fronts. The workplace ombudsman didn't care. The real estate tenancy authority saw it as too much work to prosecute. Not even the media were interested because Australian media are almost always on the side of big business against workers. Thankfully, none of these people are there anymore, but if you go to any island resort in Australia, remember to treat staff with extra kindness. Resort staff in Australia are often treated terribly by their employers and most of the time don't even get to enjoy any of the perks of working in those locations. Story 18. I think the worst thing was the sheer amount of cheating at our super high end resort. The phone calls coming in from wives looking at credit card bills and demanding to know the what, when, and the who were the worst. Our billing department had to maintain the utmost privacy, but was always honest that it was a hotel in a romantic city, not the convention the husband said they were attending. We also had a computer system full of notes because the men would bring multiple partners and their wives. The notes included who was who not to say welcome back to, and no references to prior trips. It was sad to be complicit in that. Story 19. This happened to a friend of mine I was on vacation with. We were in a pyramid-shaped hotel in Las Vegas. I forget the name. Inside the hotel, each floor is a different level of the pyramid, but open in the center. Outside our hotel room, there's a hallway and a railing that overlooks all the floors from the top floor down to the first floor food court. Our first night there, I didn't make it to the club, but my friend did. Later in the night, she decided to head back to the room and got separated from her group. She ended up getting lost on the wrong floor. While she was calling our friends, this strange man was standing 10 feet away from her against the railing, staring at her and making weird noises. He started coming closer to her and she asked if he needed help. He didn't respond and decided to sit on the railing with his back facing the drop. She asked again if he was okay. He just stared at her with a very bizarre look, made a noise, and while maintaining eye contact, ending it all right in front of her. Story 20. I was working as a valet at a hotel in a wealthy part of Orange County, California. And one night around 8 p.m. on a weekend, which was a pretty busy time for us since our restaurant was a popular spot, a woman came out looking for her ride. She tripped, fell, and spilled an entire bag of toys across the front entryway. Now, when I say an entire bag of toys, I mean there were things that, to this day, I have no idea what purpose they served. These items sprawled about 30 feet, bouncing, rolling, making sounds, and falling apart. It was insane watching myself and my colleagues try to chase down all these things while families, romantic couples, people on vacation, and day visitors watched this happen. We were picking things up without knowing where they had been, what they were used for, or who they were used on. We even had a few high-profile hotel guests that weekend. Story 21. I worked at a resort overseas. Most of the clientele we served were new money folk, high-ranking government officials with their families, and tourists. The resort itself was owned by a well-known family within the country, and the son of that family lived a Dan Bilzerian-esque life. Think of a 6'4" guy, jacked with luxurious cars, booze, and girls. You get the idea. Well, this guy was also super into ATVs. He went around doing stunts all over the place until our guests eventually noticed and asked if we could start providing ATV rentals. Great idea, right? Well, this story isn't about him. On a snowy New Year's Eve in 2015, our resort was absolutely packed. We were hosting our annual New Year's Eve banquet with around 300 people in attendance. This one dude, I wasn't serving him, but I was close enough to hear the conversation, had a few drinks and decided it would be absolutely epic if he went for a ride on one of those ATVs. His pregnant wife wasn't too fond of the idea, but didn't want to be a party pooper in front of their friends, so she finally gave him the okay. Now, imagine this. The road to our resort was a long and winding one that went through pastures and woods, with the final 100 yards or so being surrounded by two parallel stone walls that were spaced about 15 feet apart. The staff started up the ATV for him right at the entrance. He jumped on, revved the thing a few times, and then accelerated at the highest speed this thing could go. By this point, a ton of guests had gone out onto the balcony to smoke and watch the guy. Just as he accelerated, he lost control of the ATV and ran straight into the previously mentioned wall. The pure horror in everyone's eyes as they witnessed it was terrifying. However, the wife's screech as she watched the whole thing unfold is something I'll never forget. Story 22. I worked as a ski instructor at a major East Coast resort, primarily with children ages 4 to 6. When it's time to whiz before we ski, we take the kids to the bathroom as a group and supervise to make sure they wash their hands, don't crawl on the floor, and so on. The number of grown men who use the bathroom, wipe, and just leave without washing their hands is mind-blowing. The thought of their dirty hand festering and sweating inside their glove all day, along with the remnants of all the other times they've gone to the bathroom without washing, just building up over time dozens of times per season. And you just know they don't wash their hands before lunch, so now everything in the food line they touch has multiple layers of filth on it. Yuck. That, or people throwing trash in the recycling or compost bins, contaminating the whole batch, when all three receptacles are literally next to each other. The bottom line is there's a lot of unpleasant stuff at ski resorts. Story 23. I worked a summer as a bartender at a resort at a well-known amusement park. The summer also coincided with the grand opening of a high-profile roller coaster. Every night, the principal engineers of the roller coaster would go over blueprints at the bar while downing straight vodka, all while making sure everything would run properly. I also worked at this resort during the Blackout of 2003. Most coasters have a mechanism in place to ensure the cars will make it over the initial hill, but one enormous roller coaster's mechanism malfunctioned and all the riders had to make the 300-foot descent on foot. I'll never forget how their screams echoed all over the park. One evening, a fellow bartender and I kept serving shots of Jägermeister to a seemingly sober man. I came into work the next morning and was greeted by local detectives holding a picture of Jägerman. Apparently, he had passed out in the hallway of the resort where he was robbed. He was in the ICU. I was much more mindful of how often I served guests after that incident. Story 24. There was a guy who was agitated from the moment he set foot on the property. He had a bunch of requests and wasn't happy about anything. At one point, he came storming up to the desk. Because the housekeeper had apparently opened his room door, waking up his infant, he threatened to climb over the desk and strangle my colleague. The same man was at breakfast on the patio. I don't know what he was doing or saying leading up to this, but he left to use the restroom. Another guest, a little old lady, leaned over to his wife and told her she should divorce him. The wife told her husband what happened and he came to the desk to complain, telling us we needed to get a hold of our other guests and kick them off the property. He ended up leaving his vacation early. The dude owned multiple businesses in New York, something about penny loafers. Story 25. I worked as a bartender at an upscale resort and club community on Cape Cod the summer before grad school. Now, the resort was near my family's home and I was there for the money and tips. The bars and dining locations within the community weren't doing so hot at the time. Most of the bartenders were male, save for one other female. The highest volume bars were exclusively staffed by male bartenders in their late teens to early 20s until I showed up. I learned very quickly why these locations weren't doing well. If a bartender didn't know how to make a drink, they wouldn't consult any of the recipe books behind the bar. Instead, they'd tell a patron that we didn't have the ingredients, and if they got any pushback, they'd often stick their fingers in the drinks. There were also a lot of inappropriate comments made toward me. I started stepping in when they told patrons we couldn't make a drink and would take drinks from other bartenders' hands to remake them as necessary. They didn't like that and told the general manager that I was impossible to work with. His solution was to move me to a lower volume bar, so I told him about their behavior, quit on the spot, and went back to slinging Mai Tais at a Chinese restaurant instead. If you're paying thousands a year for a club membership and have to spend a minimum in such a community, you probably don't want your drink messed with. I'd have thought that these guys, whose families were also members, wouldn't want to encourage this behavior among their friends, but guess I was wrong. At least all of them and the general manager were gone when I popped back in the following summer. Story 26. I worked with a resort, not exactly for them, during spring break. I was involved a number of times and have several stories, but the most messed up one is an easy choice. This took place in Mexico, so there were definitely warnings about leaving the resort and which places were safe. One night, things wrapped up and a few people wanted to go out. Someone suggested we go to a specific bar because they serve a lot more than just beer. They convinced a number of people with the totally flawless logic of, if we go in a group, we'll be fine, they can't take all of us, right? I got dragged along despite my protest because I was one of the only people who could be trusted not to get intoxicated or spiked, so I was depended on to make sure everyone got back safely. We went to this bar, which had no bottled water, and this group of about 15 people spent the night running around while intoxicated and spiked, completely defeating the purpose of us going together. Then a fight broke out because someone was dealing substances where they weren't supposed to be, and it quickly escalated from fists to bullets. I have to assume it was gang or cartel related based on what I heard before the guns came out, but when they did, I made it clear that I was getting the heck out. Thankfully, most of the people I came with had enough sense to follow me, but unfortunately one of them didn't make it. Now, when I go to Mexico, I don't go poking around. I stick to where I'm working and the hotel, and that's it. Story 27. Since I've worked at resorts for a few years, I've experienced my fair share of craziness. One incident happened during a particularly busy holiday season. A couple staying at the resort had a heated argument that turned into a full-blown altercation in the middle of the lobby. Guests were shocked and children were crying as the couple screamed and pushed each other. It was chaos. Security had to intervene to separate them and take them to their rooms. It was heartbreaking to see such a private moment played out in such a public way. It really highlighted the complexities of human relationships and the tensions that can arise even in a setting like paradise. Story 28. It's been over 2 decades since this happened. I was a cook at a large resort in Lake Delton, Wisconsin, a sister city to Wisconsin Dells. The resort had a lot of water park attractions like slides and a lazy river. Code Brown was in fact what was called over the radios when someone pooped somewhere they shouldn't have. I was working the outdoor grill and had to cut through the water park for something I can't remember what, but there was a code brown in the jacuzzi. I saw four maintenance guys watching something bob around in the jets. It was pretty funny. The worst was when I had to get something all the way over to the dry play area. It was like a 4-story kids' play place with ball pits, plastic tunnels, rope netting, and the works. As I was passing the spa, I heard code brown for the dry play area. Turns out a kid had an incident inside the play place. The stench hit me as I walked in. It was already rank and everyone was clearing out. I looked over and saw a lot of brown ball pit balls. I found out that day that there was an underground passage I could take, which I did to get back because, dang. Story 29. Here are some of the most shocking things seen by resort workers. Guest misconduct, intoxicated guests causing disruptions, or public altercations are common. Strange requests. Guests sometimes demand bizarre things like raking all the sand on the beach or maintaining impossible room temperatures. Medical emergencies. Workers often deal with severe allergic reactions, heart attacks, and accidents in remote locations. Wildlife encounters. Handling dangerous animals such as venomous snakes or dealing with monkeys stealing food are common occurrences. Property damage. Guests sometimes cause significant damage, as driving a golf cart into a pool. Behind-the-scenes drama. Internal disputes and inappropriate relationships among staff are also a frequent source of chaos. Natural disasters. Managing evacuations and damage control during hurricanes or earthquakes can be part of the job. Story 30. It wouldn't have been a we to begin with if both of us aren't comfortable with an activity or outing we're not going. If the more adventurous one insists over my advice, I'd ask them to leave their parents' phone number with me so I can call them in 48 hours. I'd also remind them not to forget their room key. This is also why traveling in small groups is better than in pairs, especially for the young and foolish. People can divide up according to their comforts and interests, and nobody has to be alone. Some people actually enjoy the risk. If they like it, I love it. For them, I wasn't going to be the other missing girl in the story. Now that I'm older, I don't care about self-preservation as much, but in my 20s, life had just begun. Story 31. Skunks. We had a large resident population of them with clans in various territories. They were great for mouse and bug control back in the 1970s. A very intoxicated guy was having a huge fight with someone in a lighted phone booth when a big male skunk strolled over to catch bugs attracted by the light. The argument ended and the intoxicated guy slammed the folding door open, which scared the skunk into a tail-raised display. If the guy had just stood still, he would have been okay because it was just a warning. This particular skunk, whom we called Pepsi because he was often near the lighted soda machines, would normally walk past people with no drama. You just had to pause and let him pass. This guy freaked out, dodged back into the booth, and slammed the door closed. Pepsi the skunk sprayed the door and stomped back and forth, tail raised and fluffed, looking for something else to spray. The guy was suffering in the booth, and we, the bar staff, cabin maids, wranglers, and other riffraff, were also suffering, laughing. Finally, the skunk calmed down and left, not wanting to eat stinky bugs. The guy staggered to his truck and drove away. We hosed down the booth with soapy water the next day, but it reeked for a long time. It was usable, but you had to leave the door open. Story 32. In my 30-plus years between Boyne, USA, Vail, CO, and Phoenix, Arizona, multiple people were hit while crossing an 8-lane road, 4 freeway that I had to walk across every morning, even in winter. I watched Vail Resorts lie to their employees about the company's wealth and force a mandatory pay cut just to use the money to sponsor Lindsey Vonn and buy 2 more resorts for cash. A guy fell off a balcony at the Hard Rock in Vegas while on a mini break. A prince/governor of Mecca keeps his daughter in a literal ivory tower to keep her safe. I saw Joseph Herr pass away in front of his father on the side of the highway near Kremlin. My wife and I were at a bar with a guy I drank with every week. We left about an hour before he ended her man. Story 33. I live at my wife's family's resort, and we had a couple of men drown when they flipped their canoe. Neither had a life vest, and one guy who couldn't swim pulled the other guy down while trying to save himself. They both passed away before the dive team could find them and the canoe. The rule at the resort has always been to use life vests, and neither of them had one on. Now the resort is very strict about it. The owner also got rid of all the canoes, and there are only a handful of John boats available. And if any of these stories got to you too, here's more for you. YouTube thinks you're going to love this. I'll catch you in that video.